Why would a mother spend 3 winters sewing blankets into the walls of her own house? Not folding them, not storing them, sewing them, stitch by stitch, directly into the timber, where no one could ever pull them back out. Her children asked her every single year, and every single year, she gave them a different answer. A small lie, a little joke, anything but the truth, because the truth, the real reason, was something she could not say out loud until the day the sky over the Wyoming plains turned the color of a bruise, and the wind began to scream through the canyon like something alive. This is the story of Eleanor Briggs, a widow, a mother of 4, and a woman the town of Hollow Creek would later call either a saint or a madwoman, depending on who you asked. Stay with this one until the end, because what she built into those walls did not just save her family. It changed the way an entire town thought about survival, about grief, and about the quiet, stubborn kind of love that doesn't announce itself. If you have not subscribed yet, now is a fine time, because we are about to walk through one of the strangest, most heartbreaking, true-to-life frontier stories ever pieced together, and you will not want to miss what comes next. It is the year 1876. The town of Hollow Creek sits low in a fold of land between 2 ridgelines in the Wyoming Territory, a place chosen less for its beauty and more for the fact that the creek running through it almost never froze solid. That mattered more than anything else out here. Water meant life. Everything else was negotiable. Eleanor Briggs had come west 5 years earlier with her husband, Thomas, and their 2 oldest children, on the promise of land that was theirs, free and clear, if they could hold it for 5 years and prove they could work it. They built a house with their own hands, board by board, using lumber hauled in from a sawmill 2 days' ride away. They dug a well. They learned, the hard way, which crops the soil would accept and which it would spit back out as dust. 2 more children came in those years, a boy, then a girl. By the time this story truly begins, Eleanor had 4 children under the age of 11, a husband with a bad cough that would not leave him alone, and a house that creaked every time the wind picked up, which in that part of the territory was almost always. Here is where the story takes its first hard turn. In the spring of 1879, Thomas Briggs went out to mend a fence line during a storm that came in faster than anyone expected. He did not come back. They found him 2 days later, a half-mile from the house, where the cold and the exhaustion had simply taken him. No drama, no violence, just the plain, brutal arithmetic of the frontier, where one wrong decision in the wrong weather could end a life as surely as anything else. Eleanor was 31 years old. She had 4 children, a half-built life, and a piece of land that the government would only let her keep if she could prove, within the year, that she could still work it without a husband standing beside her. Ask yourself this: what would you have done? Most widows in her position sold what they had and moved back east into the homes of brothers or fathers who would take them in out of duty more than love. Eleanor did not do that. She stayed, and this is where the blankets enter the story, though not yet in the way you are expecting. That first winter alone, Eleanor noticed something about her house that she had never paid attention to before, because Thomas had always handled the work of keeping it warm. The walls were thin. Not thin in the way a poor family's walls are thin from lack of money, but thin in the way that every settler's house was thin in those years, because nobody had the luxury of building anything thicker. Single-layer board walls, with maybe a layer of tar paper if you were fortunate, and gaps between the boards that widened every summer when the wood dried and shrank. In a normal winter, you stuffed those gaps with rags, with old newspaper, with mud if you had nothing else. It was an annual chore, as routine as chopping wood. Eleanor did this too at first. But here is where her story splits away from every other homesteader's story in the county. She started keeping a journal that winter. Historians and local record keepers, who later studied the Briggs family, discovered fragments of it, preserved by her descendants. And what is written in those pages tells you everything about the kind of woman she was. She was not sentimental. She did not write about her grief in long, flowery passages. She wrote about the wind. She wrote about which direction the cold came from on which nights. She wrote about how long a fire lasted with green wood versus seasoned wood. She was, in her own quiet way, building a science of survival, one observation at a time. But fix this in your mind, because it matters for everything that comes later. Eleanor Briggs began to believe, based on nothing but her own careful watching, that the worst storms in that part of Wyoming did not simply arrive. They built. They had a pattern, and she started to suspect that one day a storm would come that was different from anything the house, or the rags in the walls, or the small stove in the corner could handle. Her neighbors thought she was simply a widow, coping the only way she knew how, by staying busy. Nobody thought much of it when, in the spring of 1880, Eleanor began collecting every scrap of wool and cotton she could trade for. She was not buying blankets to keep her children warm at night. She had blankets for that already, threadbare but serviceable. She was buying blankets and fabric and old quilts that other families considered too worn to use, for an entirely different purpose, one she had not yet explained to anyone, including herself, in words she was ready to say out loud. The first time her oldest daughter, Mary, who was 11 that year, saw her mother take a knife to the inside wall of the house, she thought something had gone wrong in her mother's mind. Eleanor pried a board loose, just one, near the base of the wall facing northwest, and she pushed a folded, doubled-up wool blanket into the gap behind it, packing it down tight before nailing the board back into place. "Why are you doing that?" Mary asked. "Because the house needs a coat too," Eleanor said. "Same as you." It was a kind answer. It was also not the truth, or at least, not the whole truth. But Mary was 11, and that was enough of an explanation for an 11-year-old. Here is the open loop I want you to hold on to, because we are coming back to it. Why northwest? Of all the walls in that house, why did Eleanor start with the northwest corner? And why, over the following years, did she always return to that same direction first, every single time, before moving on to anywhere else? The answer to that question is the heart of this entire story, and it will not make sense until we get much further along. So keep it in the back of your mind. Over the next 2 years, this became a quiet, recurring ritual in the Briggs household. Whenever Eleanor managed to trade for, sew, or scrounge an extra blanket or thick piece of fabric, instead of adding it to the family's bedding, she would find a section of wall, pry a board loose, stuff the gap, and seal it back up. She did not do this carelessly. She marked each spot on the inside of the boards themselves with a small charcoal symbol, a private code that only she understood. Her children grew used to it the way children grow used to anything a parent does repeatedly. It became simply something Mama does. They stopped asking why, mostly, though every year, around the first hard frost, one of them would ask again, almost as a tradition itself. And every year, Eleanor gave a slightly different non-answer. It keeps the mice out. It makes the house quieter when the wind blows. You'll understand when you're older. None of these were lies exactly. They were all partially true, side effects of what she was really doing, but none of them were the real reason either. By 1881, 2 years after Thomas's death, Eleanor Briggs had become something of a curiosity in Hollow Creek. She had proven the land claim. She had kept her children fed, clothed, and in reasonably good health, which was no small thing in a territory where childhood illness took more young lives than almost anything else. The town respected her. In the distant, slightly wary way frontier towns respected anyone who survived against the odds without needing anyone else's help. But here is something the town did not know yet, something that even Eleanor herself might not have fully understood as a single connected idea. She was not simply insulating her house for warmth. She had begun, slowly, and without ever saying so, to build something inside the walls of that house that resembled less a layer of comfort and more a kind of armor. Think about what wool does when it is packed densely. It traps air. It resists wind. And here is something most people in that era understood intuitively, but rarely articulated. Wet, packed wool and tightly bundled fabric can also absorb and slow the force of an impact. Not stop it outright, but slow it. Soften it by a fraction of a second that, in the right circumstances, could mean everything. Did Eleanor know this consciously? Her journal suggests something more instinctive than scientific, but no less real for that. She wrote, in an entry historians later transcribed, about the way a particularly violent hailstorm had battered the south wall of the house in the summer of '81, and how the section she had packed with blankets the previous winter had taken noticeably less damage than the bare boards beside it. That single observation seems to have changed something in her. From that point forward, the work in the walls was no longer simply about staying warm. It was about staying whole. This is the moment in the story where I want to slow down, because what happened next is the part almost nobody outside of Hollow Creek ever learned about. And it is the reason this story has survived in family letters and local church records for nearly a century and a half. In the autumn of 1882, an itinerant preacher passing through Hollow Creek mentioned, almost in passing during a sermon about preparedness and faith, a story he had heard 2 territories over, about a settlement that had been devastated not by Indians, not by fire, not by drought, but by wind. A wind event so severe that it had peeled roofs from houses and driven debris through walls like they were paper. We now understand, with the benefit of more than a century of meteorological study, that what he was almost certainly describing was an early account of what we would today recognize as a tornado, or possibly a severe derecho, a powerful straight-line windstorm capable of damage that, at the time, settlers had no real vocabulary to describe. The Great Plains and the eastern edges of the Rocky Mountain Front Range, where Wyoming sits, do see tornadic activity, though it was poorly documented and poorly understood by the general population in the late 1800s. Eleanor sat in that church pew, holding her youngest daughter's hand, and according to letters she wrote to her sister back in Ohio, something in her went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. She had been preparing her house against the slow, grinding cold of Wyoming winters. She had never once considered preparing it against wind that could tear a roof off a building. And here is the moment everything in this story begins to accelerate. From that autumn forward, Eleanor's work in the walls changed in character entirely. It was no longer occasional. It became deliberate, methodical, almost obsessive, though her children, watching from the outside, simply saw their mother working harder than ever before, which, on a frontier homestead, did not look unusual at all. She began reinforcing not just gaps and cracks, but entire sections of wall, particularly along the northwest face of the house, the direction from which the worst weather in that valley most often seemed to build. Remember that detail. We are getting closer to understanding why Northwest mattered so much to her. She traded eggs and mending work, and on at least one occasion, 3 months of laundry service for the entire Hollow Creek boarding house, in exchange for scraps of canvas, worn-out feed sacks, and bundles of raw wool that other families considered nearly worthless. To everyone else in town, Eleanor Briggs looked like a woman scraping by, trading labor for cast-off materials because she could not afford anything better. What she was actually doing was quietly constructing one of the most reinforced wooden structures in the entire Wyoming territory, built from materials nobody else wanted, hidden inside walls nobody else thought to examine. Her son Daniel, the second oldest, who would have been about 10 years old by this point, later wrote in a letter to his own children, decades afterward, that he remembered his mother working by lantern light long after the rest of the household had gone to sleep. The sound of a hammer, soft and deliberate, tapping somewhere in the walls of the house like a slow, steady heartbeat. He said it used to frighten him a little as a boy. He thought for a time that the house itself was alive, and that the sound was something living inside the walls. It was only years later that he understood what he had actually been hearing. Now, here is a question I want you to sit with for a moment, and I would genuinely love to hear your answer in the comments below. If you suspected, the way Eleanor did, that something dangerous was coming, something you could not name or prove to anyone else, would you have done what she did? Would you have spent years quietly preparing for a danger that might never arrive, knowing that everyone around you, even your own children, might think you were simply a grieving widow losing her grip on reality? Because that is exactly the position Eleanor found herself in. She had no proof. She had a feeling, an instinct sharpened by loss, by isolation, by the brutal mathematics of frontier survival, that told her the comfortable assumption everyone else made, that the worst thing that could happen already had, with Thomas's death, was wrong. She believed something worse was still coming, and she had decided, quietly, without permission from anyone, that she would not be caught unprepared twice. The years between 1882 and 1886 were, on the surface, unremarkable for the town of Hollow Creek. Crops came in decent, if not abundant. A new general store opened. A schoolhouse was finally built, which meant Eleanor's children, for the first time, had a place to learn besides their mother's kitchen table. But inside the walls of the Briggs house, something extraordinary was taking shape, layer by layer, year by year. Eleanor had developed what we might now call, in modern terms, a system. She kept detailed notes in that same plain, observational handwriting about which sections of wall had been reinforced, how many layers of material had been packed into each gap, and crucially, which areas remained vulnerable. She began to involve her children in small, age-appropriate ways. Mary, by then a teenager, learned how to fold and pack wool tightly enough that it would not shift or settle over time. Daniel learned basic carpentry, how to pry a board without splitting it, how to seal it back so the seam would not be obvious. Even the two younger children, the boy and girl born just before Thomas's death, were given small tasks, fetching materials, holding lanterns, learning without quite realizing they were learning. Here is something the children noticed, even if they could not articulate it at the time. Their mother never reinforced every wall equally. She always prioritized the northwest face of the house first, then moved to the corners, then finally, almost as an afterthought, to the walls facing southeast, the direction the house's only door and largest windows faced. If you have been wondering about this detail since earlier in the story, here is where it finally starts to make sense. Eleanor had spent years quietly observing, recording, and remembering every significant storm that had threatened Hollow Creek since the family's arrival. Every dust storm violent enough to strip paint from wood. Every windstorm strong enough to topple a fence line. Every black, low-hanging cloud formation the old-timers called a wall cloud had approached from the same general direction. From the northwest, where the land rose toward higher, rockier terrain before dropping again into the valley. She was not guessing. She was pattern matching, using nothing but years of patient observation, the same instinct that any careful farmer develops about weather. Except Eleanor had pushed that instinct further than anyone else around her, into something closer to genuine forecasting. decades before anyone in that part of the country had access to formal meteorological tools. And here is where the story takes its most haunting turn yet. In the late spring of 1886, after a string of unusually warm, humid days that felt wrong for that altitude, that time of year, Eleanor wrote in her journal a single line that her descendants would later find almost unbearable to read, knowing what came next. She wrote, "The air feels the way it did the day Thomas died. I do not like it." 3 days later, the sky over Hollow Creek turned a color the older residents, the ones who had lived through prairie weather their whole lives, had never seen before. Not the gray of an ordinary storm, a strange, bruised yellow-green, low and heavy, pressing down on the valley like a lid. Stop and consider what it must have felt like, standing under a sky like that, in a world with no radio, no warning systems, no way to know what was coming, except the evidence of your own eyes and the weight of your own fear. The wind started in the early afternoon, first as ordinary gusts, then steadily building into something with a different character entirely. A low, continuous roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Eleanor, according to the account passed down through her family, didn't panic. She had been waiting for this day for 7 years, even if she had never been entirely certain it would come. She gathered her 4 children into the house. Mary was now 17. Daniel was 14. The 2 younger ones by this point were 9 and 7. She moved them, without explanation, without panic in her voice, toward the northwest corner of the house, the same corner she had reinforced first, all those years ago, the same corner she had returned to, again and again, more than any other part of the structure. Here is where her years of quiet, unglamorous, often mocked preparation either would or would not be put to the test, and there was no way to know in advance which it would be. The storm that hit Hollow Creek that afternoon in 1886 was, by every account, preserved in church records and surviving letters, the most violent weather event the valley had experienced in living memory. We cannot say with certainty, using modern classification, exactly what kind of storm it was, whether a tornado passed near the town or whether it was an extraordinarily powerful straight-line wind event. But the damage described afterward, roofs torn away, outbuildings flattened, mature trees uprooted, suggests winds of a severity that would be considered dangerous, even by today's construction standards. 3 structures in Hollow Creek were severely damaged that day. 1 family lost their entire roof and much of their second story. A barn 2 properties over from the Briggs homestead was reduced to splinters, the animals inside scattered or lost. The Briggs house held, not undamaged. Windows shattered. A section of the roof on the southeast corner, the area Eleanor had reinforced last and least, was torn loose and lost. But the structure itself, the walls, the frame, the load-bearing sections that had been packed for years with wool, with cotton, with old quilts nobody else wanted, did not give way. Survivors and neighbors who came to check on the Briggs family in the storm's aftermath described something that, even decades later, people in Hollow Creek would talk about in hushed, almost superstitious tones. They found Eleanor and her 4 children, all alive, all essentially unharmed beyond cuts and bruises from flying debris, huddled in the northwest corner of a house that should not have survived what had just torn through the valley. And here is the detail that turned this from a story of survival into something closer to local legend. When neighbors helped Eleanor's family begin repairs in the days that followed, they discovered, almost by accident, what was actually inside those walls. Boards that, when pried loose for repair, revealed years of densely packed wool, fabric, and quilting, layer upon layer, methodically placed, clearly the work of years, not days. Word spread through Hollow Creek quickly. The widow Briggs, the woman half the town had quietly pitied, the one who kept to herself, who traded for rags and worn-out fabric that nobody else wanted, had spent 7 years secretly building her house into something that could survive the worst storm anyone in that valley had ever seen. Here is the question that I think sits at the very heart of this entire story, and I would genuinely love to know what you think in the comments. Was Eleanor Briggs lucky? Or had she simply understood, better than anyone else around her, that the wisest kind of preparation is the kind nobody sees coming? The kind that looks, from the outside, like grief, or eccentricity, or simply a woman keeping herself busy after losing the person she loved most. I do not think it was luck. I think Eleanor Briggs spent 7 years turning her own loss into a kind of vigilance most people never develop, because most people never have to. She watched the sky the way other people watch a stove, the way you watch something you have already been burned by once and have decided you will never be burned by again. In the months after the storm, something shifted in how Hollow Creek saw Eleanor. The same neighbors who had quietly pitied her began, instead, asking her advice. Other families started reinforcing their own homes, particularly along whichever direction local lore suggested the worst weather tended to come from. The schoolhouse itself was retrofitted at the town's expense, with additional bracing along its northwest wall, a decision the town council minutes, preserved in the local historical society's archive, directly credit to the example set by the Briggs homestead. Eleanor never wrote in any surviving record that she felt vindicated. If anything, her journal entries from that period are quieter, more private than before, as though the public attention sat uneasily on her. She had not done what she did for recognition. She had done it because she could not bear the thought of losing anyone else the way she had lost Thomas, suddenly, with no warning, no chance to prepare. Her children grew up eventually, and scattered the way frontier children often did, some staying in Wyoming, some moving further west, one eventually settling as far away as California. But every single one of them, according to letters preserved across multiple generations of the Briggs family, carried forward some version of their mother's quiet instinct toward preparation. Mary's own children later spoke of their mother, Eleanor's daughter, always keeping a small stockpile of supplies set aside, just in case, a phrase she used so often her own children eventually adopted it as something of a family motto. Here is something worth sitting with as we bring this story to a close. Eleanor Briggs never set out to become a legend. She never sought out the kind of recognition we might imagine someone craving after surviving what she survived. She simply paid attention, longer and more carefully than anyone around her, to a danger most people preferred not to think about until it was already too late to do anything except react. And maybe that is the real lesson buried inside this story, the one worth carrying with you long after this video ends. The people who prepare quietly, who do the unglamorous work nobody notices, who get asked year after year why they are doing something that looks strange or unnecessary, are very often the ones who turn out to have understood something the rest of us were simply too comfortable or too distracted to see coming. If this story moved you even a little, I would love to know in the comments. What is one thing you do, quietly, consistently, that the people around you might not fully understand yet? The way Eleanor's children did not understand the blankets in the walls until the day the storm finally came. And while you are down there, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because we have many more stories like this one waiting. True frontier stories of ordinary people who became extraordinary simply by refusing to look away from the dangers everyone else chose to ignore. This video is an artistic reconstruction created with the help of artificial intelligence based on historical patterns and oral storytelling traditions from frontier life in the American West. For precise historical accuracy, please consult official archives and primary historical sources.